Hello everybody and welcome to episode 6 of Man We Need to Talk, the podcast that focuses on male mental health and the stigmas that are still attached to it in today's modern society. Today I'm joined by Sammuel Yisrael. Sammuel has a really interesting story that he's going to share with us, so I really hope you enjoy the podcast. How have you been on this year so far then? It's been a bit of a crazy year for everyone, I'm sure you can agree with that.
Oh, this year has been absolutely just mental. I mean, I've used lots of techniques with mental health, but it's been really up and down because, as with a lot of people, 4 months without any work was brutal. I'm having to just kind of go, how are we going to survive? And my head was just playing all sorts of scenarios. But, it was really quite important to quieten my mind and just kind of write things down and see and plan. And then that kind of helped a lot.
Yeah, definitely. It really helps to get things down on a piece of paper, I find, doesn't it? So for the listeners then, Samuel, so if you could just give us information about, where you're from, your upbringing and stuff like that, just so people can get to know you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from a place called Albury, which is in the Black Country near Birmingham, if you don't know where that is. Grew up in quite a large family. I have a twin brother. And so a lot of my childhood, I struggled with my own personal identity. I was always being called, one of the twins, the people getting your name wrong, not knowing who you are. So, and then you sort of question who you are. And then, also quite a violent upbringing, which kind of led to lots of insecurities in me and, almost on the verge of being like Asperger's in the way I communicated. I couldn't look people in an eye. I find it struggling to meet new people. New situations are still difficult to this day.
Well, I've got Asperger's syndrome as well, so I can completely understand those sort of struggles, those sort of like not looking people in the eye and that sort of thing. I had the same sort of thing when I was younger as well. You said there was some violence there, so what was that? Within the family or?
Yeah, my dad had quite a temper on him, so he was quite volatile and could get upset, and then you get back then it was like the slipper or the hand. So yeah, that led to a lot of insecurities for myself. I mean, people always say, "Well, I'm quite a big guy. I'm about 6'9", but when you're a little kid, it doesn't. And you're growing up, those things, don't matter. But and also because growing up, I grew quite fast, so I was always quite gangly and not very coordinated, which led to lots of teasing at school. So it all compounded into lots of issues for me.
So did you feel like a bit of an outcast, would you say then?
I did have some friends. I mean, I did find myself very much on the out, not associating with other people. And we actually didn't live near the school that I went to. So again, everybody who lived near me went to a different school. Who at that time our school actually had almost a gangland experience with. So there was like fights and stuff between the schools at that time.
Wow, that sounds kind of dangerous. Yeah, that sounds like quite an experience. So in terms of how you did at school, what did you do, like O levels or anything like that? How did that go for you?
Well, school was very difficult for me. Struggling with things. I was tested for dyslexia, and my twin brother actually later in life, even though at the time we were not diagnosed with not being able to spell and those
dyslexia.
Dyslexia, that's what the word. My brother later in life was diagnosed with that when he went back to university. So it's highly likely that it's I used to put my letters backwards. To be honest, using the computer was a godsend for me because I no longer needed to write, even though my writing is okay now.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a real source of frustration when you've got something like dyslexia and you're struggling to write and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I know you said about being an identical twin. Is that right? You said that?
Well, my mum couldn't tell us apart. She used to dress us in different colour clothes. People still get us confused today. Whether we were clinically identical, I don't actually know. But everybody seems to think so.
Yeah, so you said you had a bit of an identity crisis with that then, because almost people don't differentiate between the two. So you don't feel like your own person when you before. Well, you're not now, but
Yeah,
before you had those
very,
issues.
very much. I growing up, I felt not as my own person. I mean, something that I've realised later in life, I was always struggling to either, well, one, be an individual, but also find somewhere to belong as well. So, I used to, do things to make myself amenable to other people and stuff, which led to other problems later in life.
Yeah, I mean, to pick up on that, I think a lot of people do that. You kind of change in a way to fit into other people's ideas, to belong to something, don't you?
Yes.
And a lot of people get stuck in that situation. And I see that a lot myself. A lot of people sort of sticking to certain groups or certain cultures or ideas because they just want to feel part of something rather than following their own true path. I think that's a real thing, that real issue that some people have, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I didn't say it. We run a community farm here in Malton in Northamptonshire, and feeling a part of something is very important for mental health. It's when it goes to such an extent that you lose yourself within that community. We found, giving somebody space to develop themselves, giving them work into something bigger than yourself can give you meaning to yourself. But when you lose yourself in that, it can be dangerous.
Okay, Samuel. So when you left school, what sort of work did you get involved with first of all?
So again, what did I do? I was very heavily involved in the church at that time from my upbringing. So I got involved with a youth band that were at the church. So I decided I wanted to be a sound engineer. Okay, so yeah, I struggled to get into college for sound engineering. So I went into electronics instead and went into a YTS scheme. And then I got an apprenticeship. But then through that, I kept applying to go to college for sound engineering, and I got a placement, and I left my apprenticeship, much to the disgust of my dad at the time. And sometimes looking back, I question that, but then I wouldn't be who I am today. So while working and doing sound for these bands, I didn't really get paid well. So then I started volunteering in care and worked with people with learning disabilities with a charity, and then went on to working with different organisations into care. And then after that, I went back into electronics when I got married because it paid better.
Okay, well, that makes sense, yeah. But I'm sure the care work was very rewarding, but like you said, it's not a great pay situation, is it, I suppose?
No, it wasn't a very good paying situation, and I'd actually come out of care because I'd had a few problems in the workspace, and I was no longer. I just didn't want to work there again.
Ah, well, that makes sense. So let's talk about when you first got married then. So how old were you when you got married?
That's a good question. I can't remember.
20s, 30s?
Yeah, the 20s. It was just to give you a bit of background. So this all accumulates together, really. So as part of church, I went on to a trip to Jerusalem, like a pilgrimage. And during that time, I actually felt led to change my name, which people think is maybe a bit odd, but that is. But when I came, I was there for a number of weeks, and when I came back, I changed my name by default. And that really upset a lot of people. My parents, people at the church were like, "What you're doing? You haven't sought counsel or guidance." I was like, "Well, this is what I need to do.
It's what you want to do as well."
Yeah, it's what I want to do. But that caused lots of rifts in my family, in the support network that I had at church. And then during that time, that's when I had the problems at work. I was working in a care home, and one of the guys kind of was joking around. He slapped me with something, and then a couple of minutes later, I hit him with like a soft play thing. And then long story short, I got sacked for gross misconduct.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I basically, I was like, they wanted me to resign. I was like, well, if I've done something wrong, you just discipline me, and that caused lots of questions for me, because I was like, well, did I do that out of anger? Was it, am I like my dad? Who am I? And, and the whole thing about myself kind of escalated. And then, I was being a bit separated from my family at that point because of, the problems. They weren't recognizing me, refusing to use my new name. And then I met my ex-wife, and we kind of got together, and essentially she supported me with my name and persuaded them I shouldn't have anything to do with my family, and we moved away and started a new life together.
Was that quite far away from where your family was as well, or?
We moved away from Birmingham into Oxfordshire, and I went through a whole scenario, just cutting off all ties with everybody, really.
So how do you feel about that now, looking back on that?
Oh, I wish I had never done it, but I did. I look back on some of my marriage and I question a lot of things. During that marriage, it was very controlling. I lost my faith in God. I lost track of who I was, really. My whole world became just my wife and the children. Wasn't really allowed. I know it sounds odd, but friendships outside of that was difficult. Doing outside anything out of the family unit was just next to impossible.
Did you feel like you had to be accountable to her for everything that you did?
Yeah, very, very much so. It was very much like that. Even now, my mum's. During those years, I did go back, reform the relationship with my parents, and my mum's commented. There was times when I was like really thin because I wasn't eating properly. Even what I ate was restricted, and I questioned how I allowed it to happen. I went through a time when I was rushed into hospital because I dropped from sort of 13 stone to sort of 10 and a half in like a couple of months.
Wow.
I was literally hospitalized. My body was flipping out on me.
Yeah, and I think that sort of brings home the impact that stress can have on the body, doesn't it? And it sounds to me like you were almost at war with yourself in some ways. So I'm assuming that you loved your ex-wife, but on the other hand, you were unhappy with the controlling side of things.
Yeah, there was lots of emotions, a lot of hard times there. I mean, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue.
Wow, that's meant to be really difficult. I know someone that's had that before.
And then after the diagnosis, because one of the doctors said, well, actually what you need to do is go and have some fun. It's one of the best things, and you need to go and do these kind of, and it was kind of, my ex-wife was like, no, I'm not accepting that. You're diagnosed, it was almost like, you're better now. Because I recovered through, I was in hospital for quite a while, doing lots of tests, trying to work out what was wrong with me, because my body was just seemed to be freaking out, and my eyesight was going blurry, not blurry, and the doctor was like, this isn't physically possible. I was like, well, it's happening.
Gosh.
And like I said, because I was very weak, and, I even, I was having like tests for cancer, burying meals, spinal taps, which I know a spinal tap you might have heard with the band, but when you actually experience it, it's a needle back into your spine to get the spinal fluid, and it's not a nice experience.
I'm sure that sounds very painful. So I suppose, Samuel, it really brings home about how if you're not happy in your mind, that then computes into the body, doesn't it, through different conditions and stuff like that?
Yeah, if your body has an immense effect on your physiology. Today, we're still learning what that means, and there's lots of conditions out there, chronic fatigue, ME, fibromyalgia, that the doctors don't clearly understand. Well, maybe they do, but as a layperson, I still struggle to understand what it is, because, I go through times when I literally just hit a wall and I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And that's really frustrating.
I'm sure it is.
And, I get those, and it's like, well, it's triggered by stress, and, you get that procrastination, but I've not been able to do anything, but it's accompanied with something that's like, physically, I'm absolutely just can't move. So, yeah.
Yeah, that must be super, super difficult when that happens. I mean, I can definitely relate to procrastination. I hate those days when I know I've got stuff to do, but I just can't bring myself to do them because I'm just sort of locked in my mind. I mean, thankfully, they're not very often anymore, but I spent many years when my life was pretty much like that all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to be this, I wanted to be that, but then I'd procrastinate and not really take any action and just end up like drinking and stuff like that to deal with those feelings and those negative emotions. So I just wanted to delve a little bit more into. So, at what point did you realise then that you needed to make a change and leave this relationship that wasn't serving you anymore?
It was after we were out looking for a new car, and during that time, I'd gone to a car yard to look at the car, and my ex-wife at that time, kind of turned around and said, "Oh, he wasn't looking at the car; he was looking at the girl who was next to this car because there was somebody else already looking at the car." And then it's like a huge argument ensued, and she was bringing in the kids, like going, had young kids that can't, what was Dad looking at this person? And I was like, what? And I just got off the car and I had to keep walking. But then, kind of made up, got back in the car. But then, I think during that time, I was working away, so we'd moved to Biggin by Harterton, which is in the Peak District. I was working in Stockport, which is like 2.5-hour journey. So I was doing that back and forwards every single day. And then it was like, no matter how much I earned, it was never enough. And so I'd started doing another business on the side. And one day I'd gone out with the new car, because I bought a new car for me after following an accident. And then after being out for the day, I came back, and then the argument was like, why did you take that car? I need that car. That's the big car for the kids. I was like, well, this is a car that we bought for me. And it just blew up, and
you can't put a foot right, basically.
Yeah, and I don't really know. I blocked up, but yeah, I just left, and I've never gone back.
Okay, well, I can completely understand that, and it sounds like it was the best decision for you to do that. I mean, I can imagine there's a lot of people out there now listening who are in relationships that are not serving them, but there is a lot of fear, isn't there, of one being alone, and maybe not finding someone else, and also that fear of what happens when you do make that big step and the uncertainty of it all, And I think, but then you got, on the other hand, you have a point where you get to such a crisis in your head where you just have to go, don't you? Now, Samuel, moving on, am I right in saying that you've had experience of homelessness yourself?
You want us to talk about sleeping on the street? I didn't actually spend too much time on the streets. It was like throughout the relationship, things would go wrong, and I needed air to get out, or I was forced out through the situation. And then, even though I had money, I was afraid to spend it. So then I'll go somewhere and I'll sleep on the street, maybe for a couple of days, a week, and then go back.
And how did you feel on those days where you were on the street? Did you just feel like you sort of lost everything? Or
yeah, I just felt I lost everything. When it's hard to explain. During this time, some of these times, it wasn't like I didn't have anything. I was just in a mental space where I couldn't process anything. So I was, even though you got money, you don't want to spend it because of what that might cause, and you like trying to find money, and you find yourself suddenly looking for food on the streets and then you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah,
and that's why we do what we do today. Is we have an organisation that helps the homeless people, because you never know what could cause you to become homeless.
No, it can happen to anyone, can't it?
Yeah, it could happen. What could trigger you and what could think, and it's like, yes, I didn't spend long on the streets, but I experienced that heartache, that kind of feeling of loss and not knowing what to do. Yeah.
Did your ex-wife, once you had left, did she stop you seeing the kids then?
Yes. So I haven't physically seen my kids since I left. I say, well, I've just started talking to my daughter again because she contacted me. Yeah. There was lots of allegations said, the kids don't want to talk to you, and I at that time I wasn't in a place to fight it. I wasn't, it took me quite a few years when I left to, I had a business that was doing very well, and I was still working, But when I left, I was like sleeping in my car. Then I slept at my sister's. I just didn't know what to do. And now when you just got somebody going, oh, they don't want to see you. I didn't question. I wasn't in a place to do it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started pushing back on that after a few years, and I applied for contact with them, that a lot more.
Okay, so give us a picture of how your mental health was at this time. Would you say you were depressed?
I've been told, I was working. Sorry, yes, I would say so. I mean, one of the guys just where I was working at the time just grabbed me and said, "Sammy, what are you doing? You're like a zombie. You're going through the motions. You're not there." And in the work I do, it's not a good thing.
No. I think as well, you often, when you are depressed as well, you don't actually know you're depressed. If you know what I mean, you just often people assume that once you're in there, you'll know how like you're really depressed, but sometimes you don't accept it or know it because you're just still stuck in the thoughts in your head about everything that's going on, and you're not really thinking straight, are you? In a way.
No, I was in a very dark place. I have to be honest. I was going through the motions. It wasn't until like a friend of mine pulled me to one side and said, okay, maybe not the best. Let's go and have a drink. Let's talk. And through that talking, it really helped me. And I started to validate things, and that's when I started to I talked to my mum and parents a bit more, and was helped kind of like, well, let's start to I was in a situation where literally, even though I was a business that was earning good money, literally my wife had it all, and I was like going to her asking for money to be sent to me.
Wow, that's extreme. Isn't it?
So that's how it was, and it wasn't until some of the things happened I was like, I've got to change something. It's not until everything is so extreme. When you get being told certain things that people have said about you that you just know isn't true, but then you just don't know who you are. You lose yourself in just this grief of what's going on in the situation, and it's very hard to find your way out.
Yeah, and I think when you're not really sharing it with many people as well, the problems seem a lot worse in your head as well. I mean, I know even if they are bad in the first place, they seem even worse in your mind if you don't talk about them as well, don't they?
Yeah, I found it extremely difficult because everybody was like, "Oh, what's happening? Why aren't you doing anything?" I was like, "Well, I don't know. I can't. I don't know how." Thankfully, for a long process, I started seeking help. I started going to different places for different types of therapy. I mean, I never actually went to a doctor per se, but I went to different, like somebody who did hypnotism, somebody who did sort of talking therapy. So different people that I found through different ways, and just started. I spent time in nature. I started performing in a band, and it was really when I found community and dance that I really started to find. I started putting in a lot of energy into exercise, movement, and I found for myself that movement really is a great way of getting out of your mindset. Going for a walk in nature, just being in wonderful. You're moving your body as you move. You've got those nice endorphins being released in your body. It's a wonderful method of getting things out. Just going for a walk, and even talking to, well, God, the air, whoever, even if you can't talk to people, just talk it out, write it down. Because, for me, movement is not just about physically moving, but moving things out your head.
Yeah.
So I started writing poetry. I started writing things down, getting these things out because they're in my head and they're stuck there and I can't move.
Yeah, it definitely helps to write things down. There's not so much pressure inside the mind then. So let's talk about then Soul Haven and how we got to this amazing place that you've now set up. Because I know you said you started to recover by discovering dance and all the things you just mentioned there. So after the crisis that you went through, give us a picture of how we got to this awesome situation you are now and what Soul Haven's all about, of course.
Oh, how did we get here? For a long process, I think. Well, I met Natasha, my lovely partner, who's also been homeless for a long time, and we started discussing things. When I was with my children, we'd been looking at starting a farm and looking at growing ourselves. And for me, from an early age, I've always been interested in dance and movement. To be honest, I mean, we had this plan, this idea of a farm, and it was always too big. It was always too scary to do something about. But what we did, I don't know, I had to do geography on this, but we were living in Essex. I was working in Hemel Hempstead and Birmingham, which are like the entire opposite side of the, well, not, quite a couple of hours drive. So I was staying in hotels all the time. We had to move, and we came looking to Northampton. And part of that was like, right, okay, let's just start looking at places. Start, even though we couldn't afford things, so we started looking at businesses that had property with them. We started looking at, rented property, just anything. Some of them were just houses, but some of them were, businesses that had land with them. Thinking, well, we don't know what we're going to do yet, but if it's got that, that's something we could start. And we actually found this property when we came to see a different place on the. Sorry, excuse me. I came to the village to see somewhere else, and we came, and it was just that place was so small we didn't even go in. We're just like, oh, no, that's never going to work. And we walked in the village. Our car's opposite end of the village. Came to the estate agent, saw this property. Oh, can we see it? No, you can't see. Put your name down. Go to the pub, order our food. 10 minutes later, they ring us and go, if you can get there in 10 minutes, you can see it. Oh, hold our food. Don't throw my beer away. I'll be back. And we ran across and we came to the gate, and we were on a 80-acre farm, which were extremely best. And you can't see the house from the farm gate. In fact, lots of people get lost because they can't find the place. As soon as I got to go, I said, this is it.
You just knew at that point then?
We just knew something. We came up to the farm. It was covered in 8-foot-high thistles. And then, so we said yes. And ever since then, we've been working on creating somewhere that people can come, somewhere for homeless, somewhere that people can have a space. I say homeless, but it's about people who are in danger of becoming homeless because of mental health problems or the situation. We work with the homeless centre, the Hub Centre in Northampton. We deliver food there. And we really wanted to create a space that gave you freedom, gave you space in nature. So we've got a garden where we grow food that people come and work in. We're sitting in a beautiful yurt that can sit 30 people. It's a space for yoga, meetings, and it's just somewhere that's different.
Yeah, it's a really nice place. Yeah. So as you said there, Samuel, we are actually here at Solhaven in Malton in Northampton, and it's a really beautiful farm. And there's a yurt, and there's also what's it called again? An earth
dome.
Earth dome.
Yeah.
Tell us about that as well.
So, yeah, we've got an earth dome which is made from earth and clay off-site. So made completely from natural material. So it's like a sandbag material that's filled with earth, and that's packed solid, and then that's laid to set with the clay, and then it sets into a solid structure that gives you a dome. So you can go into the dome, and the dome's used for a treatment space, a meditation space, and it is just, when you look at it, it kind of looks a bit like a beehive, and it's just got this, I don't know how to explain it. You just go in there and it just feels earthy and deep. It feels strong in there.
That's great. So in terms of the service users or the people that come here to work here on the gardens and stuff like that, that's a really impactful thing, I suppose, isn't it? Because we spoke earlier about nature and how important it is in terms of endorphins and, dealing with that mental stress or whatever they're going through. Have you got any particular success stories, or in a general respect, how do you find the people when they first come here, and then how does it affect them? Do you notice a big change within a few weeks or months? Or
we've noticed huge changes with people. We've got people who've come here with, they would hardly speak to anybody, and then we give them that space where we give them jobs, or they can just get on with and whatever they want. There's lots of jobs to do, weeding in the garden or working together as a team. Often people, when they're working together for something bigger than themselves, they develop. We give people, there's one guy who's very practical minded, so we've given him lots of challenges, as in, we want to build this, like this yurt has got an entrance to it. That was I came up with the idea of, well, could we use these? It's like a garden seat in the garden. And I was like, went to him and said, right, okay, can we make an entranceway for the yurt out of this garden seat? And I was like, yeah, I'm sure we can. So he went away and he put it together, he designed it and he built it.
Wow.
And he's built lots of different things, and that over time has given confidence. And there's other people. We've seen one guy who came from the Hope Centre. He hadn't had any contact with his family for a long time and been living off the streets. He only worked here probably for a few months. During that time, he built his confidence up, his self-esteem up, and when he left, he actually went back to his father, who's got an engineering business, and started work back with him. And on his exiting interview with the Hope Centre, they said, well, what has been the contributing thing to your recovery? And it's like, the work at Solhaven.
Wow.
That's helped me develop myself, given me the confidence to talk to other people, and I wouldn't be where I am today without it. And that's amazing.
That must be a great feeling for you.
Yeah, and we've got other people, who've written we've got a book of where people write testimonies or things about the farm. So we are a woofing host, so worldwide opportunities on organic farms. And we have people coming, or did have before all this stuff, people coming from all over the world, and they volunteer on the farm for exchange for room and board. And we've had loads of people who've come back, they give up the summer, they'll spend time with us. And we've had a number of people who've come back for 2-3 years because they're like, they love it. So they said that this has just been such a wonderful experience for them.
Oh, that's really, really amazing. And when I first met you here, was it last week or the week before? Straight away, as soon as I heard your story and what you're doing here, I was like, I've got to ask this gentleman to be on the podcast, because what you're doing here is amazing. So hats off to you, sir, for that.
Thank you.
So also, I suppose it's a good point to mention to all the listeners that we're going to be working together to do Man We Need to Talk live. You're going to be co-hosting here on the farm, aren't you, within the yurt? So for anyone listening who doesn't know what a yurt is, what is a yurt? So it's like a tent, a large tent, basically, isn't it? That's like a permanent fixture.
Yeah, well, it's a yurt is from Mongolia, and it's actually designed so it's traditionally they would pack it up and move across the plains and move with the cattle. So it is actually a temporary structure made of canvas with a wooden trellis wall inside. So when you sit inside, you have this wonderful wood wall all the way around, and then wooden beams that go up to support a big, looks like a wagon wheel on the ceiling, which traditionally, when I'm told, it would have originally been a wagon wheel at some point, and then it was developed into a more stronger structure. Our yurt has been changed slightly from the original design to accommodate the English weather. The yurt that we have has actually been made in Mongolia through a company in Oxfordshire that their family have made yurts for generations.
Wow.
So yes, you had the transports of it here, but all the material in the yurt is completely natural.
It'll be great to host an event here, and there'll be more information available about that on the Man We Need to Talk Facebook page, so that I will be co-hosting with Samuel here at Solhaven in Northampton. Samuel, I just wanted to also talk about your other profession as an aerospace engineer then, and how that's impacted, because I know that you had a interaction with a homeless ex-serviceman, and this also inspired you to put Solhaven together. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Well, through my aerospace work, I've met many ex-forces people, and one of my friends, I'm trying to think how to describe. Basically, he's somebody who had an accident while he was working, suffering with PTSD, and lots of mental health issues from his service years, and that really, I suppose, triggered me, because not in a bad way, but I just had compassion on level because of what I've been through. And the ex-service people that I've met who are homeless are actually people that we've met when we've been out on the streets as well. We've come across a large percentage of people that we've met have been from the forces. They've fell through the cracks. After you leave the army or the forces, a lot of people, they lose that family. When the people were in the military service, they have a family, they have that support. And when that goes around, they don't know what to do with themselves. And sadly, a lot of people get lost. It is changing now. We've seen a lot of changes over recent years in veteran support networks that are doing a fantastic job. So it has changed. I mean, we're talking quite a long time ago, but there's still a lot of work to be done with supporting these people, to give them, talking to people who have been in their forces. There's often problems with recognising things like qualifications. They do a lot of things. As in the forces, they have to be multi-skilled, and sometimes these qualifications and what they've done isn't recognised, because it's like, well, that's not a industry standard qualification, or they can't talk about their experience maybe as well as most people because it's maybe classified. It's like, if you're working on military stuff, you can't talk too much about some of the stuff easily. So yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine quite a lot of them have PTSD as well, don't they? Post-traumatic stress disorder, and that has an impact on their ability to manage their life. So, say for example, they've just come out of a conflict and they're damaged from that mentally. I imagine that causes problems like homelessness and alcoholism and stuff like that.
For some, yes. So some of the people that I've met on the streets have that story. They've been struggling with PTSD. They haven't had treatment. They've fallen through the cracks, and some of them have actively sought a life away from anybody else. Some of them, I've met people who've wanted to be there, but once people get support, that's one of the actually beautiful things that I've seen through this period is that working in Northamptonshire, there's been a lot of charities and organisations come together. A lot of people have come off the streets and been put into temporary accommodation, and we've seen people coming off the streets who've been living on the streets for like 15 years. They've been into accommodation, and yes, it has been a learning process. There are people out there who have lost their accommodation again because they haven't known how to handle, things like bills, looking after themselves, looking after their accommodation. So there's still a lot of work in that support. That as charities, we're not a charity, we're a community interest company, but people across Northampton, I can only speak for Northampton, we're working, trying to give befriending services, looking at how we can change this. We recognise it as a problem, and we're looking at how we can help people actively get off the streets and have a life that's meaning to them. So it's not for us to say what life should be about. It's about giving somebody the support and as much as possible to help them make a different choice.
Yeah, exactly. And I think often in a society like this, a capitalist society, people can often assume that if you just have money, then you're going to be fine. But that's not necessarily true. It's about giving people meaning as well and a meaningful purpose in life, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what we found here, is that often people comment that they feel this connection with something else bigger than themselves. And I've looked at a lot of studies that projects like ours, on average, people find 4 to 5 new friends. They form better relationships because they've got something that gives them meaning beyond themselves. And it's like, that's why working with nature, when you're working with nature, you can get lost in the nature and find that peace and hopefully to start to develop something beyond yourself.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's actually about finding a deeper relationship with yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, you can't love others. And
that's very true.
And it's finding that place. And for some people, it might not be being part of something big. It's just doing something and having that daily routine, something to go to, something that gives them a purpose. It's different for everybody.
Okay. And Samuel, if there's anyone listening here who could either benefit from the services that you offer here, or they know someone that could benefit from the services you offer here, How do they get in touch with you and how do they find out?
So our website is 𝐒𝐚𝐬𝐧𝐚𝐥.co.uk, or you can search for Soul Haven on Facebook.
Perfect. That's great. So just anyone listening out there, I'll put the links in for Soul Haven's website and Facebook page so you can find out how you can get in touch with Sammuel and his team, and if you know anyone that needs their help at this stage. So Sammuel, just before we wrap up, I just wanted to, with the theme of the podcast being male mental health, why do you think, in a nutshell, men find it so difficult to talk about their mental health problems?
I don't know. I've found that a lot of people, there's a stigmatism about it, I think. Some people find it difficult to open up. I know definitely, I say older generation, maybe even my generation, it wasn't something that you talked about. Like I say, I mean, yes, I have to, what part of the things that I've had to recognize is that, not everything is about my ex-wife. I had a part of that, my learned habits, how I was contributed to that, that situation made it possibly worse than it could have been.
Yeah.
But it was very difficult to talk about. And people, like if you're encountering abuse, how do you tell somebody, like as I say, police being involved, and you turn to somebody and go, I'm 6'9", my wife's like, ex-wife was like 5'6", 8", so I know, I'm not nowhere near my height. I'm a big guy.
Yeah.
How can you say that you're controlling situation, or you're being, how do you talk about that? It's embarrassing.
I know, it's tough, isn't it?
Yeah,
you want to be seen as the stronger person, I suppose. You don't want to share.
I was, for many years, I have to be honest, I put up with it because of what I was taught my place was to support the family.
Mm.
So I did everything I could for many years just to keep that going. And, kept changing. And yes, maybe I could have done a lot of things better, but then I look back and I've learned a term called hindsight.
Okay.
Instead of hindsight, look back with hindsight, because
Wow, that's really good. I like that.
Because you can look back and you go, oh, I should have done it this way. I could have done this. I could have done that. But then when you look back in hindsight, you realise, well, where was you at that point? Where was I mentally?
Yeah.
What was I actually able to do that? Well, no, because I didn't. What did I do? I had to look at my part in the situation, what I've done, and accept that, and maybe work through that. But what is done is done.
Exactly.
And it's the present is a gift. So we can spend all our time. I think spend our time either in the past or looking to the future and not enjoying where we are now. I know the question was, as men, why is it trouble? But I think people just generally feel able to talk.
And that's a really good answer. No, I thought that was really, really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the podcast. So thank you so much, Sammuel, for joining us on the show today. It was a really interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing everything that you did. So just to let you all know that the podcast will be continuing in the new year. We're going to have a break for Christmas. So we've had 6 episodes so far, and then we'll be continuing in the new year, and we're going to have lots of awesome guests lined up. So thanks again for all your support, and remember, it's okay not to be okay.